Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about how we can use some of the material and texture techniques that we've covered so far to texture our lighthouse. So ultimately, what we want for our lighthouse is to have a stone texture around the base of the lighthouse, and then a separate stone texture for our platform, a glass texture for the middle here, and then finally our roof on top. There's a problem with this, however, and some of you ran into a problem very similar when you were making duplicate chess pawns in class. If I add a material to this lighthouse, and then I try to change the color of my lighthouse, I change the color of the entire thing. And that's not what I want. I want an image texture here, I want separate textures here and here, and then I want a glass-like material for my window in the lighthouse. So we need to figure out, after I've made this shape, how do I separate all of these different faces out of my lighthouse? So I'm going to get rid of this material for now. We're going to add our materials later. But right now, we need to learn about a tool called Partition. So we've got a whole bunch of different tools here. I'm going to add one, Partition, and the shortcut is P. And partition just means to separate sections of a shape from other sections of that shape. So to do this, I'm going to need to grab individual parts. So I'm going to head into edit mode, and I'm also going to switch my selection method to faces. So down here on my on the toolbar at the bottom of the 3D view, I'm going to select faces. And now it's just a matter of selecting which faces we want to separate and pressing P to separate them. I'm just going to work my way from the top down so you guys can see what this looks like. And I'm only going to do a couple of different sections because you guys are going to be doing this for your assignment in class. So I'm going to start with, actually, I'm going to work from the bottom. I'm going to start with the base of the lighthouse. So remember in class we learned about our circle select tool by pressing C. So now that I've got my circle select tool, I'm just going to grab, click and drag all of these faces and all of these faces. Where else? Go. And one more. So now I've got everything in the base of my lighthouse separated, and I want to give this guy its own texture. With my selection complete, I am going to press P to partition, and then I'm going to partition by selection. I'm going to show you what I mean by that right now. So I press P, and Blender asks me, how do you want to break this thing up? Oh, get out of here. No, I don't want second screen. Whoa, 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 whoa. Stop it. End. Okay, my goodness. All right, so Blender doesn't want me, or wants me to pick how I'm going to choose my selection. I can either select by selection, which is what I want to partition, only the part that I have selected, or if I had separate materials, I could partition by material, by loose parts, but I usually am going to want to pick the things I want to partition by. So I select that, and now notice that it disappears, because that's no longer part of this object, so I can't interact with it in edit mode. If I want to select this separate piece, I have to get out of edit mode and select it. So now my lighthouse base is a separate part of my object. Let's see. That. Looking for this so that I can grab something from Open Game Art. So I want to find a stone texture. So let's go to brick and stone. And underneath brick and stone, this looks like a pretty good texture for my lighthouse. I'm going to take this stone wall and download it. Awesome. So now I want to create a texture, but remember, most important first step with image textures is to always create a material first. So here's my material. I need with a material created, I need a texture now. So I go to my textures tab. I select new texture, image or movie, and I'm going to go find image. Stone wall, open. All right, so now remember, textures won't show up until I try to render. Let's go ahead and render this guy. And of course, we have a horrible looking stretched out base of our lighthouse. Why is that? Well, it's probably because we didn't check our coordinates and our projection. So let's change coordinates to generated. And our lighthouse is shaped like a tube. So we want our lighthouse to be mapped upwards along the outside of a tube. So now with that selected, generated in tube, let's try it again. All right, that's looking better. I'm actually going to move my camera up a little bit so I can see more stuff. Okay, that's good. But this stone is really, really big. I wouldn't actually be building a lighthouse out of these gigantic rocks. So let's go ahead and make our texture appear smaller by increasing the size. Remember, in the last video, it's kind of odd, but we use larger sizes to make smaller images. So I'm going to bump this up to 5 times what it was. We should end up with rocks that are 5 times smaller. And notice that because the texture isn't seamless, we end up with these weird lines. So I'm going to bump this back down to 2 and see if that helps us out. Okay, so I still get my lines. It's a little less noticeable, so I'm going to keep that as is. Finally, there's 2 more things I want to do to make my stone more effective. The first thing is to add a little normal geometry. And notice that instead of, like some of our other geometry, instead of making the bricks stand out, for some reason, Blender decided to make the mortar stand out. See right there? See how the mortar looks like it's almost leaking out of our lighthouse? If Blender decides that the wrong thing is being pulled out of our texture, we can flip it by making geometry a negative number rather than a positive number. If I do negative 1.0 and then render again, now I get bricks that stick out and mortar that stays in. The other thing I don't like about this is my rocks look really shiny. Rocks typically, especially bricks used for building, aren't shiny. So where do I control shininess? Checking my notes. Oh, did I get rid of my material notes? I did. But we should remember from our notes from a previous video that materials control our light reflection, particularly our specular intensity. So I'm going to drop the specular intensity down to nothing and hope that we get a very dull looking rock, which we do. So, and you may want to up this a little bit because maybe your white house is wet from the ocean or something like that. But I've chosen to make my rocks very flat and dull because I don't want them reflecting a lot of light. And that's looking pretty good for me, so I think I'm going to stop there. What you guys are going to be doing in class is taking the rest of this lighthouse and partitioning out the balcony, partitioning out the glass, and partitioning out the roof to make separate image textures and materials for each of them. So by the time we're done with class on Wednesday, you guys should have a completely textured and finished lighthouse. And then after that, we'll talk about putting light inside of our lighthouse. As always, you can comment on the video with any questions if you have any or if you can think of any right now. And if you don't have any, then this is what we will be working on in class.